Hi, I'm Molly. Multiband compression and dynamic EQ are two advanced processing tools available on DiGiCo consoles that are great for problem solving, although they can be a little daunting at first. In this video, I'll be showing you what these tools actually do and where they can be useful. Multiband compression and dynamic EQ are available on all DiGiCo consoles, SD, Quantum and S-series. But today I'll be showing them to you on the S-series S21. As its name suggests, a multiband compressor uses crossover filters to split the frequency spectrum into multiple bands. Each frequency band is then given its own independent compression controls. This means that you can compress one band at a different rate to another band. This is especially useful for if you're compressing a drum group. If you're doing this with a regular compressor, the kick drum will often pass the threshold and cause the level of the whole group to be reduced, including cymbals, which might not need compressing at that point. If we replace the compressor with a multiband compressor, the lower frequencies with most of the kick drum signal can have different compression values to the higher frequencies with the cymbals. This means that the cymbals will no longer drop in level when the kick is played. Other uses may be for controlling the low end of your mix, or reducing proximity effect, a rise in the level of low frequencies caused by vocalists getting too close to the microphone. Now let's have a look at the controls of the S-series multiband compressor in more detail. The S-series multiband compressor has 3 bands. Along the bottom, we have control over the crossover frequencies of these. Each band then has all of the typical controls found in a compressor: threshold, ratio, knee, gain, attack and release. Along the left-hand side, we have 4 different view modes, one for each of the bands and a view to show all of the bands at once. In each of these views, you will also see 3 listen buttons. These allow you to isolate and listen to each of the 3 bands to hear exactly what's going on. Let's get some audio going and listen to what it does to the sound. I've got a drum group here, which I'm going to start with adding just a standard compressor to. My settings are going to be quite extreme to make it really obvious what's happening to the audio. So here are my drums. If I compress the drums a lot, so turn the threshold right up and the ratio right up, you'll hear that as the kick and snare are played, the cymbals duck, which sounds quite unnatural. This is called pumping. If I change this to a multiband compressor and apply extreme compression to the low band, you can hear that the low end with the kick is being really compressed, yet the high end with the cymbals is untouched. I can also listen to the individual bands and hear what's going on. On the S21 and S31, there are 21 multiband compressors available, which can be used on input channels, groups, auxes, or your matrix channels. Dynamic EQ is a tool that allows bands of EQ to be turned on or off when the input signal at that frequency passes a predetermined threshold. Each band can be given dynamic controls, meaning that when the input signal at that frequency passes the threshold, the gain of the EQ band is increased or decreased to the maximum. This is useful for instruments where the tonality changes with volume, such as saxophones. One scenario where dynamic EQ may be useful is for a microphone that is used for both speech and singing. This may be for a vocalist of a band who wants to speak between songs, or even a house of worship leader who is going to be speaking as well as singing. You may have an EQ that complements the vocalist's louder singing voice, but you don't necessarily want it on their speaking voice. Or perhaps the tone of your vocalist's singing voice gets a bit harsher as they get louder and start belting. You could apply an EQ to deal with this harshness that only kicks in when they get louder. You could even use it to control bass guitar nodes that only ring out when certain notes are played. Applying a fixed EQ for this would sound odd when they play other notes. Now let's take a look at the controls. At the top of the EQ view, press the Show Dynamic EQ button to reveal the controls. Along the left-hand side, we have a button to turn each individual EQ band into a dynamic one. When this is turned on, notice how we get an indicator to show us that the band is now dynamic. Across the bottom, we can see the independent controls for each band, and for the currently selected band, these controls will also be assigned to the rotaries to the right of the screen. Most of these controls are the same as those found on a compressor: threshold, ratio, attack, and release. The one control that differs is the mode. We have two modes available: over mode and under mode. In over mode, the EQ is only applied when the signal passes over the threshold. In under mode, the EQ is only applied when the signal is under the threshold. To show you how it can be used on audio, I have a small loop of hi-hat channel. I chose this section to loop because we've got some quiet hits followed by some louder ones. Again, my settings are going to be very extreme to make it crystal clear what the dynamic EQ is doing to the audio. To show you, I'm going to apply a big cut in the HF, but only when the drummer hits the hi-hat harder. With standard EQ, if I apply a big cut, this is affecting all of the audio. Now let's switch it to a dynamic EQ band. I want this EQ to be applied when the signal is over the threshold, so I'll make sure that it's in over mode. Find the threshold. I can also use this meter to help see when the EQ is kicking in. And I'll set these so that it's really obvious. If I toggle the EQ on and off, you can hear that the quieter hits don't have this massive high-end cut, but the louder ones do. Just like the multiband compressor, there are 21 dynamic EQs available on the S21 and S31 consoles, which can be used on any input channels or buses. So there you have it, multiband compressor and dynamic EQ, two advanced processing tools that can fix problems that standard EQ and compression can't. Why not have a play around with them for yourself next time you're in front of an S-series console? And subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos on how to get the most out of your S-series console. If you're watching this video live and you have any questions, put them in the comments section and I'll be around to answer them for about an hour or so. Thanks for tuning in.